Hey, 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 this is Dr. Alauna, trauma psychiatrist, and you are listening to Minding Your Amygdala, a brain, body, and behavior podcast. Today's episode is about understanding bipolar disorder. Yeah, we got to talk about our friend, maybe not so not so much our friend anymore. We got to talk about Kanye. So first, before I get started, I want to make a note that this podcast is for educational purposes only. I do not have a doctor-patient relationship with Kanye. This is all based on public information and publicly available sources, and it's not intended to give a definitive or personal diagnosis, but to be used as a example of what Kanye has said, what he's told us, but also how we can think of this not just from a medical standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint of understanding how bipolar disorder may affect your life or the life of someone around you. And we can learn from these situations. So, the reason that I thought this was a really important topic for us to do is because recently Kanye has been crashing out on X, on Twitter, formerly and never will be known as X in my mind. So, I think it's really important that Kanye has actually discussed having bipolar disorder before, and actually, he that was the title of one of his albums that that he said, "I'm bipolar." But of course, part of what Kanye has talked about is that he does not like the treatment. He doesn't accept the diagnosis. Recently, he's claimed that instead of being bipolar, that he has Asperger's or autistic spectrum disorder. But I think that it's really important to be able to really think about Kanye in layers and think about bipolar disorder in general in layers. So I think the first thing to do is to acknowledge that um, people can get very frustrated with Kanye because it seems like around the time of his albums that he does this crash out thing where he starts going online, ranting, raving, saying extremely inappropriate things, crashing out on people that he, used to profess to care about, like saying F Virgil, who has passed away, or crashing out on Jay-Z, whom he says is his brother, but saying, awful things about him, calling Jay-Z and Beyonce's kids the R word, and, revealing some probably very personal things about the status of their children. And so what we see in this space, and even with him saying he's a Nazi, or some of the things that he said about Black people or other rappers, you know, most people think, well, Kanye does this for attention, and so we shouldn't give him any attention. And I generally personally tune Kanye out, and have decided some years ago that I was not going to patronize his music, no matter how good it is. And let's keep it real. Kanye is capable of making very good music. And when people, it kind of irks me when people use the term genius, because a genius in one category does not mean that you are a genius in everything in life. And so a lot of times we have a tendency to do celebrity worship or rich folk worship, where if someone has a talent or a skill that elevates them highly in one category, like Elon Musk. Elon Musk probably is a genius in some categories. However, that doesn't make you always right. And it also doesn't make you deeply intellectual or grounded in evidence or reality in all things. It might just make you really good at doing some specific things that get you money, power, attention, or whatever else. But Elon is for another episode. Going back to Kanye. When I sit back as a psychiatrist and I just think about the observable things that we've seen from Kanye over the years, I think it's a layered situation. So let's go back to Kanye in the early phases when he was just coming around as a backpack rapper. Now, mind you, I don't know if y'all know this about me, but I am a hip hop fan. I love music and I love hip hop. So I definitely was a fan of Kanye during the college dropout days, and during the days where he was really, making a name for himself and making, music that really moved us, and the Jesus Walks era and the other elements that really put Kanye in the spotlight. But I will say that even early in his career, Kanye was beyond what most people would think of as confident. So there may have been some early trappings of, uh, him being socially awkward and him being really fixated on certain things that might indicate that yes, maybe he was a person who had autism spectrum disorder or even narcissistic personality disorder, but just wasn't, fully showing symptoms or diagnosed at that time yet. Because for many people, especially historically, when kids were different, or they might have learned differently or socialized differently, a lot of times we didn't have the language to be able to and the testing to be able to diagnose them and understand what was going on at that time. But fast forwarding into Kanye's early career, the first thing that I remember happening that probably had an impact on his mental health was he had a really severe accident where he almost died. And if you recall, in Through the Wire, he was rapping through his mouth, his jaw being wired shut because in the accident he had been so severely injured that it broke his jaw. And when you have any kind of impact that's that significant, it very likely also probably caused a traumatic brain injury. And traumatic brain injuries, or most of the time we think of concussions and things that, are temporary and may heal. You can also have traumatic brain injuries where the damage to a particular area of the brain never fully resolves. So this is the time frame when we see Kanye really blowing up after his recovery from the accident. But as he came into success, we saw that he encountered traumatic situations with the rupturing from the interaction with his crew that he made it with, and he blew up on stage at times with in relating to the circumstances with his with Jay-Z, with his other rap peers, and then he also lost his mother in a very traumatic way, which I think his mom did some things to help keep him uh, focused and grounded. But without that, the next thing that we saw was him married into the Kardashian family, having the kids that he had, but then also divorcing, which is also traumatic. So, in the midst of all of this, we saw multiple crash out episodes. Remember when he ran for president and he went off about the situation with he and Kim, and when he went off about being a Nazi and the rambling interviews that he did. At that time, I observed those things, and it was obvious to me that he was in some level of a manic episode. And I know that it sounds like his family had attempted to compel him to treatment, and he perceived being compelled to treatment as, or being, they call it different things in different places, but being hospitalized or forced hospitalization. He of course characterized that as them, in a paranoid way, them trying to harm him. So we've seen over the years that Kanye has gone through different phases. There was the phase where he became very obsessed with religion, and all of a sudden he wanted to be very, switch from being very sexual to being very Christian, if that's how you could describe his behaviors. And that's when we started seeing the gospel music and Jesus is King and the Sunday services experience, where you still will hear reports of the disorganized and domineering way that he led that experience. So when we're talking about, and as I said, I've listened to Kanye's music, so I've heard Kanye rap about drinking and getting high, doing drugs. He's talked in interviews about taking nitrous and encouraging other people to try it, because yes, while it may be quite relaxing, which he may struggle to feel relaxed, that those are drugs that can, with long-term use, can literally put holes in your brain, and that's not something that you can recover from once the damage gets so far. So I'm saying and laying all of this out to make the point that his situation is not straightforward, and most people's situation is not straightforward because can often be difficult to sort out. It's the chicken or the egg argument. Or is the use of the substances driving the underlying mental illness, and the behaviors that the person may be doing, or is it that to cope with whatever it is that their brain and their body is doing, that they begin using substances to try to manage the highs and lows. So let's actually talk a little bit about the criteria for bipolar disorder, because I think it's really important to understand that it can be confusing for people, because many times a person experiences episodes of depression long before they actually have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So when we think about what we mean by depression, most people think their mood is supposed to be a straight line on any average day. But the reality is that our mood is constantly changing, up, down, all around. It can change by the second, the minute. You can be having a great day and get a phone call that changes your mood, or you can be tired and then have an experience that energizes you, makes you happy, makes you laugh. But that's the average person's mood, is just kind of seesawing. If you think about a graph, somewhere in the middle, where a little happy, a little sad, but nothing too much in the extremes. But when a person experiences a major depressive episode, it can look like five or more of the following symptoms. So, for one, having a depressed mood, and that doesn't always mean like sad, woe is me. It can mean disconnected, it can mean feeling numb or empty or hopeless. And it can even mean, especially in adolescence, more irritability than what we would typically call sadness or mopiness. But that's the hallmark of this experience, that a person experiences a significant dip in their mood, and they might experience things like diminished interest in doing the things that they normally did, or I might be doing them, but I just don't enjoy them. I don't get as excited about the sports that I used to love. I don't take as much pleasure in doing things with my family as I used to, just not feeling as excited about what's going on in their day to day in a noticeable way. When it comes to food, some people lose weight when they feel depressed because they may lose their appetite or not feel like eating as much, or not getting up and taking care of themselves. Where other people might find that in their depression they eat more, they eat to self-soothe, and that could result in weight gain. Or where they used to be more active and exercise, they find themselves not doing as much to maintain their physical health. The fourth symptom would be insomnia or hypersomnia. So the way that we think about that would be sleeping a lot, feeling tired, having difficulty getting out of the bed, or maybe not always sleep, but just low energy to the point where it's difficult to get up, move around, and take care of things. And for some people, the insomnia looks more like, I want to sleep, I'm tired, but my body keeps waking myself up. I have a lot of things flowing through my mind, and just really can't get comfortable enough and can't turn my mind off enough to sleep. Number five, agitation. So what we call psychomotor agitation or psychomotor retardation, which is just a fancy way of saying like moving slower or moving faster. So sometimes a person can feel kind of agitated or antsy in their depressive state. And then for other people, it can feel like, oh my gosh, I'm moving so slow. I'm thinking slow. It's almost like my brain is not firing on all cylinders. And that really is the case, because these are all symptoms that are brain based and based on the chemicals that our brain is releasing and using to communicate. And there are times where our body becomes so overwhelmed that it is not doing that communication process well, resulting in what we would call depression. So thinking about the sixth symptom could be fatigue or loss of energy, which is noticeable in the daytime, or noticeable throughout your normal day, a significant change from your baseline. Seven would be feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt, like taking on things that don't necessarily belong to me. Oh, I'm so sad about all the things going on with that my friends are telling me, and then it becomes my problem, thinking about the world's problems, just over processing things, going back through things that happen in life and kind of beating oneself up about it. Number 8, a difficulty with thinking and concentrating, maybe indecisiveness or an inability to make decisions and stay consistent with the thought process to follow through. And last but not least, a person may experience thoughts of death, thoughts of self-harm, or thoughts of just, not necessarily wanting to harm yourself, but wishing that you were dead or wanting to die, and having suicidal thoughts, which can go all the way to the point of thinking of a plan or thinking of ways to do it. So when we think about that low mood state that we would call depression, and if a person is exhibiting more than 5 out of 9 of those symptoms, they may have depressive episodes multiple times that last more than a couple weeks, sometimes months at a time, long before they ever begin to manifest mania. So a person who might have actually gotten to treatment may have been told, you have a condition that we call major depressive disorder. And they may even start them on medication or start them in treatment to try to help with that condition. But what makes the difference between what we call major depressive disorder versus bipolar disorder is that in bipolar disorder, the person can swing over to the other side of the mood spectrum. So, if you think about, we were below the graph in those depressive episodes, now we're rising above the graph. So this is not just, one of the things that really bothers me is when people throw around psychological terms without understanding them. So I hear people say, "Oh my gosh, just she's so bipolar. She was fine one minute, and then she was going off the next." That is not bipolar. Having a mood swing, having a change in mood, getting agitated and upset in a snap is not, by definition, bipolar disorder. The weather, it's like, oh, the weather's so bipolar. It's hot one time of the day, is super cold in another. I understand why people use that reference, but that is actually not what bipolar disorder is. In a manic episode, let's start with hypomanic, because hypomanic is a graduate. Hypomania and mania are graduated experiences. So if we think about hypomania, hypomania is a distinct period of time where the person is abnormally and persistently elevated or expansive or irritable in their mood. And that can look like them having, more energy in the day. They can have an inflated self esteem or grandiosity, thinking themselves to be greater than somebody else. And, I can start this business and do this thing. And maybe they have all this flood of ideas that they can do, but more than what a human could actually do in real time. They may have what we call decreased need for sleep. And decreased need for sleep is a little bit different than the insomnia that we talk about in depression. Decreased need for sleep may be where a person can go 2 or 3, sometimes even 4 days without going to sleep at all. Or maybe instead of sleeping their normal 6 to 7 hours, they start sleeping 2 hours at night and feeling like, I don't need more than sleep than that. I'm energized. I can get back up. And they fill that time with activities and other things that might be more directed towards doing something, but not always getting it done well. They may be more talkative than usual or have pressured speech where they're talking with almost like a fire hose effect, that they're talking over people or interrupting or saying things with a lot more force than usual, because their brain is moving so fast and giving them so many thoughts and so much input that it comes out in the way that they communicate. They may also have what we call flight of ideas, or basically their thoughts sometimes moving faster than how they can move their mouth to even get it out. And flight of ideas sometimes can look like a person being very distractible or jumping from subject to subject or thing to thing, or switching very quickly between topics. Then the fifth thing could be distractibility, where it's, squirrel. They're thinking about this one thing, he's doing something, and then they shoot over to this other thing, because it is their mind is easily drawn from one situation or conversation to another just based on whatever stimulus comes in front of them. Another thing that you may notice in hypomania is increased goal directed activity. And that could be, a person still in hypomania often is able to maintain their responsibilities or their duties, but they may struggle in because of these symptoms. So increased goal directed activity. I remember having a patient who decided that in her spare time where she wasn't sleeping, she was going to reorganize her entire wardrobe and hang everything in the colors of the spectrum in her closet from short to long. In terms of every single piece of item in her closet was categorized. She ended up really making more of a mess than anything, but it was a big project that she took on because her brain was just telling her, do something, do something. And this also, the next thing that you might see is excess involvement in activities that have high potential for painful consequences. So this might be buying sprees, buying things, and then when the hypomania effect wears off, you realize, oh my gosh, I bought a car I really can't afford. I bought all these luxury things that I need to take back because I can't afford them. My credit card bill is huge. It could be sexual indiscretions, like, having sex with someone when you're in a relationship, but the impulsivity, the adrenaline, and the other chemicals that are raging in the person's body pushes them towards making bad decisions. This could be foolish business investments and many things in that category. So if you think about hypomania as a person having a few of these symptoms, maybe 4 or so out of those 8 or 9, that elevates them maybe halfway up the chart. When you think of mania, think of it going even further. So this is where you would notice even more heightened self-esteem or grandiosity. So there are times where I've had manic patients who thought that they were Jesus reincarnated. Matter of fact, one time on the inpatient unit, we had Moses, Abraham, and Jesus all at the same time. Actually, we had 2 Jesuses. And I was wondering how it's going to work out, but they all got along. But the point is that your brain can become obsessed with high-minded things. Sometimes people have what we call a hyper religiosity, where they go from, and you have to think about it in a cultural context, right? This may be a person who was previously, maybe they were regularly attended church and they did regular church activities, and then suddenly they are going to church every day. They're going to every single offering. They're staying after. They're believing that they're receiving special messages from God and other things. And now look, I'm actually a psychiatrist who deeply believes in the spirituality of human beings and the crossover of our biology and spirituality. And it's also important to recognize that when people are experiencing mania, it's often unlocking creativity. It's getting them past the blockades and the disinhibition that a person may have when they're thinking, what's somebody going to think about my work or my art, that makes a person anxious and not want to put things out. So it sort of makes sense to me that when Kanye is about to put out projects, it's often in the time frame where he seems to be in manic episodes, which makes him probably more creative in the studio when he's putting his work together, and more willing to share it and put it out there, because then even if it's not, the little bitty nuances are not finished when he might be in a regular perfectionistic mode. When he's in a manic mode, he probably feels more comfortable with releasing what music he has created and prepared. And often this is actually something that we have to think about when it comes to engaging people with treatment, because especially people in creative careers, they can find that they have a relationship with mania, and the mania helps them paint and or compose better, or they feel like they're receiving downloads that help inspire them to the next thing. And that is a very real challenge, that when you are used to having these manic inspiration and having these times of what seems like unlimited creativity and connection to the cosmos, if you will, it can be really difficult to take medication and not feel that rush and that, I mean, having manic episodes, many will describe it as being high without having to take any kind of drug and in a sustained way that can feel good. But it also contributes to lack of insight and lack of willingness to adhere to treatment options when those options are available, because people don't like to lose that sensation. It is a luring type of sensation. So just to, cap off talking about mania, it can have all of the things that we mentioned in hypomania, just to a greater extreme, to the point where the person is not able to function in their typical roles, whether it's in their family, their job, or in their personal lives. So that same level of decreased need for sleep, like they may feel rested after only 3 hours, or say, I can go 3 days without sleeping and I can just work the whole time. And they really feel that way because their chemicals are raging, which is throwing off body patterns and other chemistry that normally would have them on a certain 24-hour clock. Again, we talk about the talkativeness and the what we call pressured speech, with the person is talking like this and you almost can feel it sometimes, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe that you can talk that fast and you're just telling me everything that's on your mind. And just an example of how the speech patterns can become pressured and or rapid or just nonsensical. And so when I look at a situation like Kanye posting, people are like, he's posting nonstop on X. I don't have X because I'm not giving Elon, hopefully, any any shine if I can help it. But just to understand that when you see, I mean, even when you think about if he's posting that often, then that means he's not sleeping, right? So we can actually see the pattern of the decreased need for sleep, and the flight of ideas and jumping around subject to subject, and the paranoia of him thinking people are out to get him, or at this point he's done enough things that there really may be people out to get him. But that is another way that it's very difficult sometimes to sort out a person's challenges, because you have to sort through their actual life, and with him being in Hollywood and intermixing with Diddy as he has, we don't know what things that he may have experienced that may cause him to think that people are out to get him. But looking at that, even that separation from reality that some people can have, that would be labeled as paranoia. So all of that just to really come back to the concept that these conditions are very real, and they're based on the brain and the brain's chemistry and the way that it impacts your biology. There is no mental illness that is not founded in the human brain and in what that brain is doing and interfacing with the invisible biology that all of us have, because all of us have these animal mechanisms that we need to understand. So I do understand why people get tired of hearing from Kanye and frustrated with him. And mind you, a lot of what I admired about him in the past related to his music, I can no longer overlook the behaviors that he's engaged in. But I also don't want to lose the thread that this is about mental health, and mental health that has been ignored, pushed to the side. And for me, I look at situations like even looking at Wendy Williams and her circumstances right now, and the way people, we have a tendency when we care about people, when we see them as celebrities, we always want to say, hey, free this person, let them do what they want to do. But I think it's also important for us to recognize when their mental health is compromised, that they're not always making decisions that are in their best interest. And even when they can talk and communicate to other people in a way that seems normal, it does not mean that their brain and their body is not being affected significantly by whatever conditions that it is that they're managing. So let's talk just a little bit about how, now that we've talked about the symptoms and what you might see with a person that is having an episode of, now, mind you, people can alternate from depressive episodes to manic episodes and back. And that often happens that after a person has a hypomanic or a manic episode that may last a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however long, they often crash after that and find themselves in significant depressive episodes. And so it can be really difficult, especially if they're not being managed by a professional. It can be really difficult to actually, especially for a family, to understand what's going on with this person. I can't figure it out. Sometimes they're like this and then other times they're like that. And I don't even know what to do with that. So if this sounds familiar to you, if you have family members who you have seen these behaviors in, then here's some good news for you. There are effective treatments for bipolar disorder. The issue is that stigma and a poor mental health system, lack of access, and many other reasons are responsible for why people don't often get to help. But bipolar disorder and mood stabilizing medications, there are several categories of them, and I'm not going to go into them necessarily here. But there are a lot of times the anti-seizure medications and antipsychotic medications and antidepressive medications are used in different combinations to help a person's body and brain regulate itself. And I've personally seen and treated people with medications that you could not get this person stabilized through therapy. Their chemistry is off, their body is responding in a way that medications are required to cool down the flames of bipolar disorder and all of the chemical disruptions that are happening within that person's body. And once they are stabilized, which this might mean hospitalization, sometimes it is important to temporarily hospitalize someone, especially when they're unable to keep themselves safe or when they're unable to make decisions that would, or where they might hurt themselves or hurt someone else, even inadvertently. So, beyond hospitalization and medication, there's options for intensive outpatient treatment. Like sometimes a person doesn't need to be in the hospital, but they can have therapy sessions, they can have case management, and they can have other people around them to help keep them, integrate them back into their normal, healthy lives with extra supports around you. Then, of course, we also have therapy because I think for any person who's going through a mental illness, it is traumatic to have your body and your brain seemingly, I'm use the term loosely, go crazy on you. And understanding how to process your thoughts, how to check them for being reality based, how to develop the awareness of when you may find yourself tipping into symptoms and being able to go to your doctors and stay on top of the symptoms instead of waiting until a crisis has happened or a huge setback happens in a person's life. Having family therapy, counseling sessions, and all this, even peer support where other people who have dealt with these conditions that can help give you tips on how to manage it yourself. Those are all really important factors to put into a person's life when they are dealing with bipolar disorder, because unfortunately, these conditions are deadly. People eventually get to the point where they've ruined family relationships, ruined professional relationships, even gotten to the point where they lose their money, their income, end up homeless, or have other horrible outcomes in their life because maybe they're get addicted to drugs or get addicted to alcohol or get addicted to other things that they're using to cope and self-soothe to try to manage the highs and the lows of their illness. And that can lead to things like conservatorship, or sometimes we call it guardianship, where a person is put under legal custody, where someone else is having to manage their affairs because their decision making has been proven to be distorted for so long that they're not able to really take into account the important factors of life that are needed to keep a person stable and going in the right direction. So, unfortunately, often as a last resort, a person may be court ordered to take medication to preserve their well-being and safety. But even then, it can be difficult to enforce those type of orders because in America and really in general, people's autonomy and being able to make decisions for themselves is the top priority. So my final thoughts on this as I wrap up this episode, because this podcast is really about mental health education and making sure that we are deeply understanding that none of this happens without a connection to the brain and the body, and that the brain, body, and beliefs are what ultimately create our behavior. I think it's important for us to understand that as much as, we'd like to kick people to the curb that are doing some of the crazy crash out things and the things that bother us and disturb us, I think it's important to recognize that it still comes from a place of unwellness, and that for anyone, if whether you see yourself or you see a loved one in this description, as we've gone through what bipolar disorder is, and as I get further in the episodes, we'll talk about what it's not and how that might relate to conditions like PTSD or personality disorders. We'll start making that differentiation. But I think what's the capstone that I want to put on it is that with consistent treatment, with medication, with follow up, with a supportive team and supportive family, many people with bipolar disorder, they do perfectly well. They live healthy lives. They can be successful. You can look up, I won't list them, but there's many people that we would call celebrities or famous that are living with bipolar disorder. And because they take care of themselves, because they take their medications, because they are acknowledging that this is the condition that they have to manage for throughout their life, right? Even if you have it under control, it's still your body and brain, and it's part of your genetic profile. So you have to manage it in order to keep it from becoming as much of a problem. But the important thing to recognize is that there really are effective treatments out there, if you are willing to do them and willing to commit to them. So I hope that in this episode that I have been able to offer some useful ways of thinking about someone who is complex like Kanye, where we have maybe a love-hate relationship with him. But even in the midst of whatever is going on, I do hope that he seeks actual mental health and professionals and people who really can help guide him towards having a healthier balance in his life. And that may, whether or not we ever see him in that space, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know that what we're seeing is not just him attention seeking, but when a person is in the midst of mania, they often will engage in extreme behaviors and extreme thought processes that leave us scratching our heads. So, thank you for listening to this episode of Minding Your Amygdala. This is a brain, body, and behavior podcast, and I am your host, Dr. Alauna, trauma psychiatrist. If you'd like to learn more from me, you can follow me on social media platforms at Dr. Alauna, Dralauna. And you can also come learn with me at the next Trauma Cure, which by going to register at thetraumacure.com for our next 2-day virtual live educational experience, where we will have a wonderful time. Like, you ever think you can have fun talking about trauma? You can. Okay. That's what we do in the Trauma Cure, creators using radical empathy. So catch us on the next episode of Minding Your Amygdala. And remember, it's time to evolve.